This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rappin. Joining me this week, a superhero only here for a radio interview because they owe me a favor. Very special guest, Alex.
Thanks for having me. And actually, I prefer super villain, to be honest.
Super villain.
Yes,
oh, I'm sorry.
yes.
My apologies.
It's okay. It's okay.
Sometimes those lines, they just get blurred in my head. You know, it's a whole thing.
But thank you so
but
much
I'm so
for
excited.
having me back. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm super jazzed to talk to you today because we are talking about a very cool project that you have going on called the StarWell Foundation. I think we're going to get into it a little bit later in the show. But to kick things off, I guess for folks who maybe don't remember, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and then maybe just how have you been? How have comic books been? We'll get into all that stuff.
Last time we were here, I was with my co-host, JR, for OMV, Opinions May Vary podcast, and we were doing a team up. We were sidekicking each other's shows. It was great. And and since then we did another 2 years or so of our podcast. JR retired and I'm taking it over, and I can't do the show as it was without JR. So I'm doing a new thing, and I was inspired to do a audio drama, and that is the StarWell Foundation. It's basically imagine Make-A-Wish kids asking to meet supervillains, and who at the foundation would want to have to go out to find them, collect them, and try and get them to do something nice instead to get the villains to trust them, get their coworkers to trust them. Will the heroes ever trust them? And so it's all combining these different elements and the hazards that go with it.
Yeah, it's a very, I'll say, big web from what I've listened to. It feels like there's a big web of story going on. It's really, really cool. There's so many voices in this thing, but we'll get into all of that, I think, a little bit later. Sure. For now, Let's talk about comic books. I really want to hear what you've been reading. So tell me about one of the books that you've been reading recently.
It's not exactly a new book, but
sure. I
got married last year in November. We just took...
Congrats.
Thank you. It's been awesome. We just took our honeymoon in September, and I'm a weirdo. My wife is also kind of a weirdo. So our wedding was partially Donner Party themed. And so what better honeymoon than to go to Donner Lake? And
no.
Yeah, we went to Truckee.
That's amazing.
We went to Truckee, California. That was one of our stops. We also went to the Stanley Hotel in Colorado, which is the inspiration for The Shining. Stephen King stayed there and pretty much wrote most of the book. We also went to the Clown Motel in Nevada before that. But while in Truckee, California at Donner Lake, we hiked up Donner Summit, and there's a Donner Memorial State Park. And we spent too much money in the gift shop, but it was fun.
Of course.
And I picked up this small, like, hardcover book, and it's almost like it's the kind of thing that's going to show up in a lot of museum gift shops kind of thing, but it's funny. It's by Nathan Hale. And it's part of the joke is that, like, I'm not the guy that was executed for treason 200 years ago. I was born in 1974. But he like researches these historical things, makes them kind of funny, puts some comedy into them. And so it's Nathan Hale's Hazardous Tales, specifically the Donner Dinner Party. And I listen to other shows. Last podcast on the left, I've listened to their Donner Party episodes. I've listened to My Favorite Murder Donner Party episodes. I've done some of my own research. There's a really good book called The Indifferent Stars Above. This is one of my favorites because it's Nathan Hale, the writer and artist of the book, is basically telling the story from the point of Nathan Hale about to be executed by the British. So there's in the comic book, there's strips of the British soldier or who's going to have executed. The executioner's there. And so Nathan Hale's, it's almost like an Arabian Nights kind of thing where he's trying to, like, tell stories to drag out the execution. And so he's telling all these other historical tales that are going on. And so you get some comedy involved where the executioner, who's killed a bunch of people, like, doesn't want to hear about, like, so-and-so's horse that got left behind because it couldn't keep up because they're out of food and water. He's like, tell me the horse is okay. And like, but he's just chopped off 20 heads.
Right.
But it's not highly detailed art. It's like, it's almost newspaper comic strip art. It's the story still comes across. You see everything you need to see. The jokes hit really nice. And they even give you points where it's like, okay, we're going to deal with some cannibalism right now. Skip ahead 5 pages if you don't want to hear about it. So that's been nice, but it's the difference between watching actors act out Donner Party or listening to other podcasters talk about Donner Party, he's able to show you some new emotions with characters' faces between the Graves Party. Why is George Donner get to be the leader? Because he doesn't actually know what he's doing, hence why they got in the
Right.
problem in the first place. But it was a lot of fun, and I kind of want to pick up like some of the rest of his books too, if they're as entertaining as this one. But it was great. I like Donner Dinner Party by Nathan Hale's Hazardous Tales.
No, I dig it. Nathan Hales, I've heard of a couple of other books that this guy's done. So like you were not the first person to recommend it, but I did not think that he would have done a Donner Party book. And I love that so much. Like you said, I've also listened to a bunch of other like podcasts and different things retelling this story. And I never would have thought that a comic book might be the way to actually experience this. So I'm 100% going to pick this up. This sounds like so much fun.
If you have a good dark humor funny bone, you're gonna be chuckling at points here, and that was one of my favorite parts.
That's awesome. That's amazing. Let me talk about one book that I've read recently, just because I want to have a nice little balance here of us talking about things. I read a book that was similar nature, kind of dark. If you've seen the movie, maybe you know. But I read Oldboy Volume 1. This is by Garen Tsuchiya, art by Nobuki Maingisha. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. I apologize. But yeah, this is the manga that the movie Oldboy or the movies Oldboy were based on. If you've seen the Josh Brolin one, I'm really, really sorry. But if you've seen the one that came out in, I think 2003 or 5, it's from Korea, that's the better movie. It's fantastic. This book is unbelievably quick to read. I don't really want to go into like too many details, but I can say safely that like the basis of this book is a man wakes up in a prison, like a quote unquote private prison that someone paid to have him put there. He doesn't know why, doesn't really remember what happened and how he got there. All he knows is that he's been there for 10 years. And as the story goes on, we kind of get a little bit of insight on the person who did it. We maybe get a little bit of insight as to like the fact that he's an extremely rich person and has some sort of obsession with our protagonist who we don't really know the name of at the beginning of this volume. But yeah, it was published in 1997. The movie came out in 2003 or 2005 in Korea. And I'll say for a book that was published in the 90s, there's a lot of eyebrow raises in terms of just like some racial stuff that I was like, oh, this is uncomfortable. The fact that a very, very young woman who is an adult by all implications of the book is latching on to this 35-year-old man in a way very, very early on in the book. But beyond that, the book is really cool in the way that it paces itself. There's a lot of like chapter endings that go, how am I supposed to stop reading this volume? I have to know where this story is going to go. And that's basically how the volume ends, right? There's no way I don't just continue reading this book forever. I kind of know the story of Oldboy, but based on just how this first volume has progressed, I don't know how this manga is going to work, because all of the spoilers that I think pay off in the third act of Oldboy, the movie, are right there from the get-go in the beginning of this movie. So, or the beginning of this volume. So really excited to see where this series goes. I think it's like 7 or 8 volumes long. And if the other volumes read as quickly as this first one, I'm going to be done with this probably before the weekend is over. So very, very excited to keep going. But yeah, it reads so fast and there's so many questions still, even after 200 pages of the first volume. So I'm absolutely loving this. Have you read or seen the Oldboy movies?
I have. I've seen
the
one you mentioned earlier, not the Josh Brolin one. And I have a few like stunt martial artist friends who love that hallway. That hallway fight. They will analyze. they will watch that over and over again. And it's my friend Brett started like a pretty popular like it was a Facebook thing, and everyone got involved where, what's your fighting thugs in a hallway music? Like what's your preferred song to fight thugs to in a hallway?
Yes, that's so good. And then you just match it up with that scene, right? No, that's incredible. Yeah. I mean, I'm reading this right now, and I'll say we're recording this a bit in the past from when this episode is going to be released, but I'm reading this because we are recording a special episode of the I Read Comic Books Movie Club, a Patreon series that we do every 3 months. It's me and Brian and Paul who are on the show. This month, we decided to do foreign films, and Oldboy was the option, and it won by a landslide, and I'm super excited. Foreign films and heavy quotes there, because like there's a whole discussion we could have about it. But yeah, anyways, it's going to be really fun, and I'm really excited to read more of this Oldboy series. But Alex, why don't you tell me about another book that you've been reading, because I'm dying to hear what else you've got on your plate.
a few months ago, I like to check out my local comic shop and take in as much as I can. Because,
Mm-hmm.
usually you'll go in, you'll get your regular pull out the file. Maybe you'll check
Mm-hmm.
the X-Men shelf or something. But how often do you wander through some of the more indie stuff and actually look to see what's new? Not everyone's great at like spotting the new thing because you can't check out all of them. There's so many. And I got to like issue 4 of this book called Astronaut Down. Has nothing to do with the comic Officer Down from 2018. But
Okay.
and I dig astronauts. It's in the right setting, they're creepy. The big
Right.
diver suits, astronaut suits, when they're not where they're supposed to be, freaks me out.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, I feel that because it's like it's like in their big diver suits. Even a diver suit out of place is very creepy, right?
Well, there was like a Doctor Who where there was an astronaut suit like on the beach, and I was like, why is this terrifying me? But
yeah.
so I picked up I started on issue number 4, and I flipped through a bit, and there's a guy in a wheelchair, and this whole hospital room full of people are saying, hey, you saved our reality, even though yours is dead. Thank you so much. And I'm like, what is going on?
What?
So I was like, well, that's an insta-buy.
Yeah.
And
I mean, talk about a way to get you hooked on a book, even with issue 4 of a 5-issue miniseries.
Exactly,
That's crazy.
So I was able to get 4 and 5 right there. And I picked up 1, 2, and 3 later, and I read through it. And it's not your astronaut in the typical sense. By the way, it's written by James Patrick and art by Rubine, I believe. Not Rubine, I'm going to go with.
Rubine, yeah.
And there's no space travel. It's going to be mind travel, and there's a program to send someone's consciousness to other realities of themselves.
Dude,
so
what?
it's wild. So what happens is there is some kind of experiment in a different country, and this tear in reality opens up where this flood that they call a cancer like washes over the entire world. And whatever this flood hits, it's green and it's gooey, and it just makes everyone die, and not just by like drowning them. Some panels can be pretty grotesque. So
Sure.
they start to erect walls around certain cities. The experiment center was researching this thing. It's like, well, we don't have the right equation to fight what this is, but other realities might. So we got to send our people to jump to other selves. And so they start working on that, and you find out that's what the main character is. He's an astronaut meant to go to another consciousness in a different reality. But by issue 2, it's already a year old. So it's not, I'm going to say spoilers, but he meets his girlfriend who died in his reality. So immediately, if you're tracking, it's like, well, she just got fridged. You meet 2 more realities of this girl, and she has a very positive / negative influence on him. So she's not actually fridged. She's there, but
yeah.
So his reality got fridged. The other ones, it's important for them to be there and how they react to what he's done, and if he's doing his job or not. And basically, he has to remember the new equation in the physics smart stuff. I don't know it. But like beam that back to his reality so they can try and solve the problem and metastasize the cancer of their world. So these 5 issues go through all of that. And there's parts where, I feel like
it's a lot. How is this in 5 issues? I'm just like, this could be 24 issues, and I feel like it wouldn't necessarily cover.
There's a lot that got skipped over, and there's a few things I haven't gotten to yet. Like, I feel like James could have spread some of these topics out, but he mashed them all into one thing. And if you get a lot into one thing, then maybe people want more. I don't know how they're going to have more of this.
Right.
But there's parts where it gets political because the government and some of the scientists were like, we need to fund the sciences so we could do the thing. But of course, there's going to be some people who go, no, we need to do nothing and just let it solve itself. And so like a couple issues are like, well, we have to defeat tribalism because that's what's stopping us from fixing the problem. And it's like, you can tell where that's coming from to an extent.
Sure.
And I'm not going to say it wasn't heavy handed, but the people exist. It's, he's taking it from real world examples. But it was a wild ride to go from at some point you doubted he was even going to send the equation back to his reality or not, or just stay in the peaceful one he was at.
Right.
Yeah. So I dug it. It was wild. None of it was what I expected. And even if you could tell me trying to explain, if you like concepts that don't make sense to you, if you like some Grant Morrison books that aren't Batman, then you'll like
Right.
this.
Yeah.
I get pissed when like I should understand Batman. If I don't understand something else Grant Morrison's writing, that's okay. I'm not supposed to. I accept that.
Yeah. There's a spell being cast on me, and I understand that my reality does not understand the thing being beamed into my brain. I get
exactly.
it. Yeah.
But that's from Aftershock Comics. I like
Nice.
how the back cover is Read Dangerously. Is like it's ads for their own company, and like I get it. I dig it. It made me think a bit. It was entertaining, and you can still pick up like the trade off of their website.
Nice. Very nice. Well, yeah, I this kind of sounds like the type of book that I would buy month to month from like Image and not really understand it, and then 2 years later come back and read it. But so thank you for telling me about it after it came out. Now I can just read it all in one go, and I might actually understand it. So another book on the list for this episode. But let me talk about one book really quick before we get into the top of our pile. What books that we're going to be reading next? I read Operation Sunshine #1. This is by Henry Zebrowski and Marcus Parks. Art by David Rubin. Colors by excuse me. Colors by KJ Diaz, letters by Ferran Delgado. This is Henry and Marcus from the last podcast on the left. So if you're familiar with their work, you kind of know what you're getting when you go into this series. But this is a book that's about vampires. Surprisingly, it's not about cryptids or about like the government black ops cover up issues. Maybe that gets factored into this book a little bit. I won't spoil it completely. But this book just came out pretty recently. The story follows a 350-year-old, quote, bug, aka a vampire spawn, as she tries to live her life under the radar as much as possible in New York City. However, after a run-in with an OG vampire, as they call them, things begin to get a bit more troublesome for this young bug. And really, that's a gross simplification of this series. There's a couple of other characters that are involved, but I really don't want to spoil it because it just came out as of recording a week ago. So, you know, if you're listening to this now, maybe you've already read it, but still. David Rubin's on art in this book, and he's absolutely perfect. If you've seen his work before, you know that when he wants to get extra zany and wild with things, it kind of takes on this old school Ren and Stimpy style SpongeBob, when like SpongeBob gets dried out, or when Ren and Stimpy are doing something extremely gross and they just settle on a single frame of something that's far too detailed for a cartoon. Like, I feel like when when this book gets very gross, Rubin really decides to just like go in on the details and make everything just look very disgusting, and it's awesome. It's so much fun. I will say there's a lot of blood and gore, but hey, we're dealing with vampires here. That was probably expected. But yeah, I really like this. And the thing that was probably the best part of this whole series is Rubin decided to not take on the stereotypical vampire look of this book. And I think if you've seen their art before, you know that they really are always going to lean into like the zanier, monstery, crazier stuff. And I really appreciated that the vampires, the old school vampires, are these just hideous freaks that when you think of the idea of a something that wants to suck your blood, that's what Rubin put on paper, not like a guy with teeth who's wearing a cape. It's awesome. It's so much fun. But yeah, I will say Parks and Zebrowski, they worked together on a previous series called DC Horror Presents Soul Plumber. That was a very wordy book that was definitely them trying to just poke fun at the absurdity of a lot of different things all in one book, as well as religion. And it was fun, but it was very, very wordy. It reads like an early Stan Lee book, kind of, where they're just like nonstop captions, a lot of dialogue for no reason, just to try to like shove as many jokes on page as possible.
Some Bendis bubbles.
Yeah, well, oh no, it's not as bad as Bendis. I was just kidding. No, it's very much like that, where they clearly have a lot to say, and there's only so many pages that they can put it on, right? But with this book, they definitely either worked with an editor or just really honed in on what they were trying to do with this book. And I think that's because it's a much simpler concept of like, there are these vampire spawn and they need to somehow figure out how to deal with these old school vampires who have all come back to town. And yeah, it feels very much like another series that came out from Image called Bloodstained Teeth. This book was published by Dark Horse, I should say. Operation Sunshine is. But Bloodstained Teeth came out from Image a little while back, and it's about a old school vampire who has to hunt down all of the vampire spawns that he for reasons that are insane and ridiculous, created all over the world, and they all turn into like pop stars and content creators on the internet. And the Vampire Council, who includes people like Bram Stoker and like basically every vampire media person you could think of, are on this hit super council. They're like, hey, go hunt those people down and kill them, or we're going to kill you. And so the book is for him following, all this stuff. It's very fun. But so it feels like that, but from the opposite perspective. We're following this vampire spawn as she's just like trying to survive, realizing that she made a really bad deal 350 years ago and just needs to get blood and just wants to smoke cigarettes. It's great. But yeah, the last question I have is, have you noticed, I don't know if you're at the shop super regularly or maybe you're on the internet and stuff, but I feel like there's an uptick in vampire books recently, or maybe that's just what's happening in my head.
I haven't noticed it recently. It's vampires are one of those things, like every decade or so they come back around. Every 10, 20 years, like they spin back up on the cycle. In 14 years, we're going to do a brand new zombie book. It'll be amazing. I
know. Walking Dead will still be reprinting its issues, Oh, that's, I don't know. There is like I think we've had a bigger discussion on an older episode of IRCB where we talked about like there's this fluctuation. Someone wrote an article about this fluctuation between vampire stories and zombie stories, and it's all based around like where American politics are leaning. Like, so it's a weird trend. I don't know if it's correlation means causation or whatever, but somebody noticed a weird trend. But that's a different discussion. Instead, let's move on and talk about comics that we're looking forward to reading next. Comics that are on the top of your pile, new, old, or just something you've been meaning to get off your shelf. So Alex, tell me what's next for you on your top of your pile.
We've got more Superior Spider-Man coming. I'm psyched for that. That's my favorite Spider-Man. I have nothing against Peter Parker, but just the idea of Doc Ock taking over and doing things his way, over wordy, just the way that Pete would never do it. I dig it. I got a tattoo of him.
Really?
Yeah, it's, again, my wife is brilliant. She's like, what if we got a couple's tattoo? And I was like, what'd we get? She's like, the pointing Spider-Man meme. And I was like, well, yeah, but I'm not going to get regular Spider-Man. I'm going to get my favorite Spider-Man.
Heck yes.
And she's like, which one do I get? I was like, I don't know. Find a favorite Spider-Man. And then at some point she realizes there's a punk Spider-Man, and that settled it for her. So I'll send you a picture of our tattoos of pointing Spider-Man. So I got Superior. So yeah, there's a new series. I believe it's going to be a mini series. Dan Slott writing, Mark Bagley on art. Like, what better artist can you ask for? Bagley's, dude, like, for real. I mean, he's a top 6 Spider-Man artist of all time. And if you want a comic book, a classic comic book art, who else can you ask for than Bagley?
Totally.
And there was like a Superior Spider-Man Returns that came out maybe 2 weeks ago. So the actual like #1 will start later, before this episode comes out.
Sure.
But and that'll be the #1. But it's taking place. It's like Doc Ock, remembering when he was kind of still Peter, still Spider-Man.
Right. Okay.
So it's kind of flashing between what he did then and what his consequences of that now would be, now that he's come back as Dr. Octopus again. So I'm psyched for that, because even through the variety of Spider-Verse books, there was a reality in the Spider-Verse where they needed Uncle Ben to like venture out into the radioactive wasteland because he was the only one who could survive it. And Pete tried to be inspiring with great power and great responsibility, and Ben chickened out and he wouldn't go. And so Otto Octavius steps up and he's like, you pitiful, pitiful man, get out there and do your job for the rest of our realities. How can any of them, all these Peters, looked up to you and you're going to let them all down? And Ben's like, you're right, I better go. And I'm like, that's what Pete couldn't do. Otto did it. So that's just some elements of why I like Otto Octavius as Spider-Man.
Oh, sure.
I dig it. You could probably assume that's one of my favorite things, is by what we're going to get to later on, of villains partially redeeming themselves.
Right. I am sensing a pattern. As soon as you started talking about it, I was like, hold on, things are starting to click in my head. No, that's awesome. You're not the first person to tell me that Superior Spider-Man run is like amazing, and I didn't know that this book was coming out. I am kind of bummed to hear that they did the whole the whole alpha and omega thing that with this book series where they're like, here's the pre-issue you
Yeah,
need to read
yeah,
before the miniseries, and I'm
yeah,
sure there's going to be a post-issue. Like just give me an 8-issue series.
right.
Don't make me think this is special. But anyways, Mark, like you said, Mark Bagley on art is top tier choice. Like there are, like you said, a handful of other really good Spider-Man artists right now, and Bagley is definitely up there as like one of the greats.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me talk about a book that I'm looking forward to reading next, and that is Of Thunder and Lightning. This is by Kimberly Wang. It's a book from Silver Sprocket. Folks who've been listening to the show for a minute have noticed maybe that I've been reading a lot of Silver Sprocket books, and that's because I was at a comic book club with some old folks that I used to work with at Comixology and had maybe a couple too many whiskeys, and then I just kept clicking add to cart on a bunch of books, and then one day, like $120 worth of books showed up at my house, So I've been trying to read through all of those. Of Thunder and Lightning is one of those. The story seems to be like, I'll give you just the synopsis here. It says, in a world where pop media in a world where pop media meets military power, two idle super soldiers are locked in a world-ending conflict on behalf of their corporate nations. Battles blast across the dying land, both sides convinced of their own righteousness. Ragnarok looms on the horizon, yet Magni and Demo, young icons created for the sole purpose of eliminating the other, find their closest reflection in their opposite. Now completing the mission means destroying the one who understands them the most, and don't we just love to watch enemies become lovers? I am so excited for this book. I read a very similar series called, similar prose book, one of the rare prose books that I've read recently, called How to Lose the Time War. It's about two people on opposite sides of a multi millennia spanning war between the red side and the blue side, and they go from wanting to hate each other and kill each other to maybe something else. It's an amazing book. It's very short, and I was crying by the end, and I didn't realize like there were suddenly tears coming down my cheeks. I was like, is this the most beautiful book I've ever read? And I'm very excited to read this comic because it feels like it's got that same vibe. And I feel like most of the books that I've grabbed from Silver Sprocket recently have just been like all winners. It's just further proof that, like, I think, like you said before, Alex, like going into your indie bargain bin or going into the backlogs, finding something that's off your beaten path, you will be surprised more often about the quality than not. And Silver Sprocket is one of those publishers where I'm like, anytime they put out a graphic novel, I'm immediately putting it in my cart and like waiting to be like, can I spend $30 on this hardcover? But it's always there. It's always on the top of my Christmas list. Like, these guys are incredible in what they publish. So I'm very excited. And Kimberly Wang's art looks amazing. If you go to the preview page, I'll post that in the show notes. It just looks like a fun book. So I'm very excited to read that. But let's talk about other things. Let's talk about supervillains and audio dramas. Alex, you're here to talk about the StarWell Foundation, which is a series that you put together after a successful Kickstarter campaign, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. Yep.
I guess my first question here is, tell us about what this series is and how did it go from like idea to now we've got a dozen or so voices putting this whole thing actually into production.
I think I've had at least 20 voices so far, to be honest. It's you ever go to a comic show, and not quite a convention, it's a show. It's like it's the $1 ticket to get in, and they have a raffle sometimes, but there's like some dude there who has movie scripts, and so like you buy an old script that was never actually made into anything. It's like I have a Hellboy script that wasn't the Hellboy movie that came out, and
whoa,
yeah, it's well, like there's no telling if it's genuine or not. Whatever.
Oh, sure, for sure.
And
but still fun. It's like a fun experiment, right?
Yeah. So there's one that I picked up that was for Preacher, the movie. It was Garth Ennis, and I ended up giving it to a friend of mine who became a huge fan of the Preacher, and he's like, at one point he goes, "Hey, you should make an audio drama out of this. You should do a radio play." And I was like, I don't know, I could, I'm not. And
I know that exact feeling. I get it.
But that kind of stuck in my head, and then the actual show came out, and I was like, well, I don't want to do that anymore. But there's points where I had ideas because I work a very boring day job where I just push boxes. So it takes like 5% of my brain, and the rest of it's just either going to kill itself or think up a new world or layers of new
Mm-hmm.
worlds. Um, and I love villains so much and their redemptions. My favorite team is the Thunderbolts. Kurt Busiek
Okay.
is fantastic.
Yeah,
Hence,
yeah,
he
yeah.
wrote the Thunderbolts. He also wrote a lot of Astro City, which I haven't read all of, but what I've read, I really
Mm-hmm.
dig because it's about a place. You don't have to follow one family, one hero. The whole city is important to some extent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So all that really gets to me. And I started creating my own world. And it's not 100% mine because at some point you're going to borrow things here and there. And if you could see other writers doing it, like, so season 2 Invincible came out on Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
We know who Darkwing is. Yeah, that's a Batman of
Yeah.
some, so it goes around like
Right.
that. So maybe I have two versions of a Bat person in my show. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but it was a lot of, I think I can do this. I think I have a story in my head. I've been putting together a bunch of characters. Who would I want to see? And some of it comes down to what comics or shows have let me down, where they didn't go in the
Mm.
direction I wanted them to go in, and the direction they did take was disappointing. And how would I do something like that differently, but with my own inspirations or my own thoughts or what I know or don't know?
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know how to be a good writer. I'm trying, but I'm trying.
Sure.
And so the story came together in that format. And it is inspired by a post from Tumblr, which was, I think, from 2006. It's very old, but
Oh, geez.
I give credit to that. That was the original idea, and I took that and ran with it. Um,
So I'm not familiar with this post on Tumblr. I think I read this somewhere else too.
mhm.
What was the post on Tumblr, and how did it go from that to what the StarWell Foundation is?
So that was called the Villain Wrangler, right? Wrangler, the Villain Wrangler, and it had that original premise of blatantly calling it Make a Wish kids, asking for
Mm-hmm.
supervillains. And the thing with Tumblr is that, like, it becomes a community conglomerate now.
Oh yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
so
yeah.
everyone's contributing, like, a sentence here, a small paragraph there, contribute. The original post is, like, gone. I don't know where it's
Oh,
lost, but there's
okay,
screen caps of it. So you can
sure.
find it somewhere, but I don't know
Mm-hmm.
how to contact anyone on Tumblr. And there's so much that goes on. And then now the posts that have been, like, screen capped and reposted, all those have comments of, well, someone should make this. Someone should
Mm-hmm.
this should get made. And
Yeah,
in some are like, well, someone wrote their own fanfic of that, and that's great. And I was like, well, maybe I want to make that.
mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
and I came up with my own versions of characters you might recognize or might be original, or ideas that are pretty basic or pretty wacky. It's
Mm-hmm.
going to get weird, and I'm kind of proud of that. But also
Yeah,
not, because not everyone's going to get it, and that's okay.
sure.
We'll get there. But that was great. I only read it twice, and again, that was over a decade ago.
Mm-hmm.
But it was really good, so I give credit to that, and that was my inspiration. Yep.
That's awesome. It sounds like, but it sounds like it was just something that was just like
Oh
swirling in your
yeah,
head. Like I
yeah.
get that. That's like you're just. I can't. I know that it feels overdone or it feels overused or whatever, but I got to do my own take
Oh
on
yeah.
this thing. Otherwise, it's just never gonna sit
Yep.
right.
Yep. Pretty much.
That's cool. So you have this idea, you work on it, and you work on the Kickstarter. I guess, what was the Kickstarter experience like for you? Because, like, I'll be honest, I've never supported a Kickstarter that was an audio drama before. So like, how did that like shape how you were pitching
It's
things and the rewards and stuff? And I guess how was that a cool experience for you?
it's real tough. It's difficult
Okay.
because um it was a thing that it's going on the OMV podcast site. So it's going to
Mm-hmm.
be free. Everyone can listen to it.
Yeah.
So no one's buying an exclusive thing. Like when you
Mm-hmm.
back a comic book or a graphic novel or whatever, you're getting the thing. Not everyone else gets the thing. I
Mm-hmm.
don't have a physical thing that everyone can get. So I had to figure out other things someone might want that's related to the show. So an
Mm-hmm.
OMV merch bundle was in there. Um, Brett Kelly, who voices Malvarmo, is also an artist in his own right. He's amazing. He had a
Oh,
series.
nice.
He had his series of jack-o'-lantern with bat wings as pins. So I had like 5-7 different colorways of these pins, and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
Brett, can I ask you for a Starwell colorway of your flapjack flapping jack-o'-lantern? And so he agreed to that. So that was part of like that. What can I offer as a physical item for backing an audio drama that is free?
Right.
So that's always difficult. It's like, hey, pay me for a thing that everyone can access.
Yeah.
So how do I make it special for them? Right.
Sure.
So there's only
Sure.
so much of like, I'll read your name on an episode. You'll get credited on this page.
A
So
vinyl pressing of the audio drama, right? That was that not an option?
no. What I did do was at the lowest level, everyone gets an ID badge as they're an intern of the StarWell Foundation.
Oh, cool.
On the back is a QR code that accesses a Google file, and a Google Drive, and that's where all the episodes are. But that's also where secret bonus episodes will go.
Nice.
So
nice.
In StarWell episodes, it's a 3-act format, and in between are interludes. They could be news segments, commercials. A streamer has a segment in one, and one of these interludes is for a true crime podcast that takes place within the StarWell universe in Brava City. And they talk about the villains or the heroes or the crime that happened within Brava City and stuff like that. But that's like a 2-minute promo. So what I'm making is the backers will get full episodes of that show. It's called How Crime, by the way. so when you ask how crime, it's like, was this very crime or not very crime? And also, how did you crime? And that's what that.
I'm sorry, that's killing
Thank
me.
you.
Oh, that's so good. I love that so much.
And so it's, I wrote it as if I'm writing My Favorite Murder with
yeah.
Karen and I can't think of the other one. Anyway, but it's great. My friends Nichelle and Katie are voicing them, and so that's some of the bonus stuff that I'm trying. Hopefully, once the season is complete for now, I'll also go back through and get bloopers up as well. So that's part of the thing of like, please back my Kickstarter. Here's what you'll get. I promise you'll get cool stuff.
Sure.
But but it's to allow me to make the thing. So that was the most difficult part. Thankfully, before we finished OMV, before Joe retired, I put up 2 episodes of StarWell way back in 2019, I believe it was, maybe early 2020, and I call it the pilot season. So that's the intro to Mary and other characters that work at StarWell. That's the first time meeting Malvarmo. That's the first time meeting Magenta Thorn. And so season 1 kicks off where you're not getting the same intro because that happened in the pilot season is what I'm calling it. But
gotcha.
Yeah. So having something to prove, like I can do it. They came out on time. Here's what it will sound like. I've gotten better since then, I promise. But having something already made to prove to backers, potential backers, being like, I've made it this far. I've tried. Here's what I've been able to do with no budget. So I could try to do more with a budget. So all that went together in trying to make the Kickstarter. It was stressful, but we got funded. We got a stretch goal. So I was very thankful, very grateful, and so far all of it's coming through.
Yeah, no, and it sounds great, right? Like I listened to some of it, and it's well produced, it's well organized. I mean, you've got, like you said, a dozen plus 20 plus voices attached to this thing, which is like a whole other question I want to get to. I do want to like make a note though, because there's the thing that I think a lot of people forget about like Kickstarter, right? Is that Kickstarter now puts this big warning sign on their page right before you finish a pledge to like, hey, this does not guarantee that you actually receive anything, right? Which like a lot of this time, I think a lot of people expect Kickstarter to have like this pure transaction, but I think like a project like yours is actually what Kickstarter was made for, right? The idea that you want to be able to fund a thing and it's truly crowdfunded, and like if people get anything, it's like a bonus benefit, but it's not the expectation. Now I think like the mindset has completely changed. We've got a dozen different crowdfunding solutions out there that'll guarantee you that you get something if people reach a funding goal and stuff like that. But I do want to recognize that it's admirable to like actually go and do a proper real Kickstarter where you're like, the goal isn't that only you folks will get these audio files. Like this is going to go out to everybody, but like I think you did the right thing in saying, here's bonus content, here's like pins, here's art, here's all this other stuff that is slightly that's additional to the thing that we're actually trying to fund. So like, I just want to say it's admirable and I appreciate it because I love the spirit of Kickstarter and I think you fully embraced it with yours.
Thank you. It was
So
rough. It was stressful. And that if anything,
I don't want to diminish that either. Like I understand.
That's what took me the longest to actually get started was how do I make this worth it to everyone else? It's like, well, I have a bookmark or have a shot glass. I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
No one's getting a coffee mug for me with the StarWell logo on it. I don't want to do that.
Right.
But yeah, it was fun. And as of this episode coming out, there should be 2 left. Episode 4 should come out before this episode comes out here.
Okay.
So yeah, we're halfway through, but at this point, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I guess let's talk about like your voice talent. So like obviously you're one person, and to make an audio drama, you kind of need a bunch of people, unless you're like a Jim Carrey or a, Mike Myers. I don't know, somebody that actually has voice talent. I don't know. We have voice talent, but it's different, right? Sorry, I don't know where I'm going with this, but how did you find the folks that you ended up having voice all of the various characters that you've gotten, like the side announcers and all this other stuff? You said some were friends, but like that's a lot of folks to get in like different rooms to make audio.
Yeah. I've been very fortunate, very lucky by having a lot of friends. I've worked at a local theme park for over 20 years, where I just show up for the Halloween season. I do makeup. I make zombies.
Gotcha.
I make monsters. Sometimes I'm the monster. We go out and scare. We have a good time. And then like my closest friends I've built working that job because it's fun. We have the most similar interests. I have 2 friends from the other job where I push boxes that have worked out also for 20 years because we're not eye to eye on everything. So and I'm in the entertainment department. If I was in a different department, I'd meet different people. But being in entertainment, you meet people who want to act. They know how to have characters. They know how to project. So there's a lot of things that they already do. It's like, if you say, hey, do you want to act? They'll be like, yes, can I?
Yes.
And if you say, do you want to act for money? They'll be like, when do you need me?
Right.
So that's also that's where a lot of the Kickstarter went, is because when someone funds a Kickstarter, they go, well, the money goes there, and then someday I'll get a product, but you don't know where the money actually goes. I paid all my actors, unless some of them were very kind and refused payment. And I'm paying musicians to make themes and songs for me, but that was a big thing. Like, I want everyone to feel it's worth them giving me their time.
Right. Right.
So since I do makeup at a theme park, I also had a few makeup gigs for local low budget movies, or just shorts and horror things that'll go to different festivals and whatnot. So then I made a different batch of actor friends because I'm killing them. I'm putting blood on them. I'm turning them to a monster. All that kind of stuff, and we're still friends, and we maintain that. And I say, do you want to come act? I'll be like, yeah, sure. And what's fun is you might not even know someone's into acting or has in the past. There's a guy who pushes boxes with me, and he's like, oh, I did a lot of community theater 30 years ago. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to remember that. It's like, save this note for later, right? And so I was like, hey, do you want to come do the show? He's Magenta Thorn.
Oh man, that's cool.
Exactly. So it's a lot of remembering that and meeting friends of friends, because you have one friend who's a performer, they have other friends who are performers. And so I've been fortunate that people like me for some reason. And I'm just very grateful and glad. And when I ask for help, a lot of them say yes. And that's where a lot of them came from.
That's awesome. Well, you've got a good cast of voices. I'll say, like, that's the one thing I really appreciated, is that sometimes, I don't know, you listen to podcasts. Some people probably listen to this podcast right now and say, I can't tell these 2 guys apart. But I appreciate that your show like definitely does a good job of making sure that every voice does sound separate and unique. And I know that's a really weird thing to describe, but I was never lost in any moment. I was never mistaking people for other characters and stuff. And yeah, so however you did the production for this, it was very well done. I'm telling you, folks, go out there and listen to it. It sounds great.
What makes it easy is when I have a normal setting and I have normal people voices, and guess what? They might be the same people when I have a superhero battle or something else going on. because now they get to dial it way up. It's like how
Right.
Dwayne Johnson says The Rock is Dwayne Johnson, just dialed up to 11, right?
Right.
It's like, I'm not, if I was writing the same 5 soccer moms, you might have a hard time telling them apart. But if
Sure.
one can throw cars and one could read minds and one is from the moon, then, well, they're going to sound a bit different than they would if they were just soccer moms.
Right.
So that's part of giving them a chance to, like, look, make it ridiculous. Pull out something weird, go for it. And Michelle Arslan, who plays Louise, came in with this voice. She wasn't in episode 1. You haven't heard her yet.
I haven't, yeah.
But she was in the pilot season, and as soon as she came out with this voice and did that character, like, I had an episode for her. Like,
no,
so
that's
it's like, cool. I know what to do with her. She sounds like an old party girl. It was great. So I gave her her own wild adventure, which I wouldn't have had if she did something more subdued. And so gotcha. Sometimes the actors, like, give me cues of their own that go, I could do something with that.
So that's interesting, because I was wondering, and I don't want to eat up all your time, so we'll wrap up here in a bit, but, like, does this story, like, have an end, right? Is there, like, a long term? Is it like, let's do 40 seasons, or is this like a 30s radio show where you're like, I'm going to keep doing this until the money runs out? And the reason I bring that up is because it sounds to me like the show is kind of written based on the people that you know, and you've been inspired by both, like, the comics and TV shows you read, but also it sounds like the people have also been like, oh no, now I need to make a character for this voice that someone just made. So, like, how does that all come together, and where does that guide you in terms of, like, telling a full story, or is this going to just go on for forever?
Many of the characters already exist.
Okay.
Usually what happens is someone just says something mid-recording. Kristen Chesler just happened to do, like, a little kid voice, and I was like, I need a kid voice. Don't go anywhere. We just extended your recording time for another 20 minutes. I'm trying to think of what your question. So I do have an end for Brava City.
Okay.
I don't want to say exactly how many scenes I have in mind. It's less than 10. It's more. Okay. It's more than 3.
Okay.
Could the story then go somewhere else after that? Maybe. But gotcha. That's not in my immediate plans. And what I do plan, hopefully, would be more seasons of 6 episodes. They're about 30, maybe 40 minutes each. Under 40, over 30.
Sure.
It's a ride to work or so. But I'm purposely throwing a lot into each episode, which I worry is to my own detriment. If it's like, is there too many characters? Are there going to be too many subplots? You meet a character in episode 3, you're not going to meet them again until season 3.
Oh my, yeah.
It's like, that kind of thing is very fun to me. Rob Guillory and John Layman during Chew, they show you a dude following Tony somewhere in the 30s of the issue, and he doesn't come back for 20 issues.
Right.
Because he was, like, stalking Tony to kidnap him to the cult. And I was like, that's fantastic. That's something you could get picked up on. So that's fun to me. Is everyone gonna want to follow it or care to pay attention? I hope so. Maybe that's where re-listens will, you'll find something new each time. You'll find something else to pick up on.
Exactly.
Because the interludes that True Crime is going to have commercials for, they might become real episodes that are backer only for season 2. And then you learn more about what they're talking about and why the city's the way it is and why the villains act the way they do.
Interesting. Yeah. See, but this is the kind of stuff that I think that, and I would hope that our listeners of our show would appreciate, because I think, one, you've basically sold me on this forever now. 30-minute episodes to me is like the perfect size thing. That's like, I can sit down and listen to that podcast over lunch, go for a short walk and listen to an episode. That's amazing.
Do the dishes, fold laundry. Yeah,
exactly. None of these 2.5 hour long comedy podcasts. I don't know what the hell these people out there are thinking. But no, this sounds like the perfect digestible thing. Well, I'm really excited to see where it goes, and I hoped, fingers crossed, we'll get up to 6, 7, 8, 9 seasons, whatever that number between 3 and 10 ends up being. But I guess the final question here, I guess, like, where can people find this show, and when's your next Kickstarter going to be? Is that too big of a question, too soon to ask? I don't know. But where can people find the show for now?
omvpodcast.com. If you search any of your podcast apps players for Opinions May Vary or OMV Podcast, it'll show up there, because that's the name of the podcast we've had since 2012. And that's where you can find the StarWell Foundation.
Awesome.
We're also on Instagram. That's where many of the updates come in. So episode 6 of StarWell, that'll end season 1. That'll be late December, early January. And then give me a few months to write season 2.
Okay.
hopefully maybe a new Kickstarter for season 2 before 2025, to be honest, because it's just me. Like, a lot of people help me out making music, saying lines, but I have to put it all together.
Totally. Yeah, no rush. I was didn't want to put too much pressure on you, honestly. But no, that's very exciting. We'll make sure to have all the links to that stuff in the show notes, so folks can go check that out. And yeah, I think when this episode comes out, it'll be almost 4 episodes, and then the season will end, and it's going to be, I'm sure, very teary-eyed, huge cliffhanger. I'm very excited to listen to it myself. But I guess for now, to wrap things up, I have an unbelievable announcement that I'm announcing right now, and I'm not going to be able to talk about it publicly for another 2 weeks on the regular show, which is crazy. But I'm going to announce it here. Next week's episode of I Read Comic Books, Paul and I are going to be talking with the one and only Ed Brubaker, creator of so many other books, and my stomach just exploded with nervousness just saying it out loud. But we're going to be talking about Ed's new book, Where the Body Was, with Sean Phillips. I'm very, very excited about that. You can check us out on Instagram and TikTok, Discord, Goodreads, YouTube, all those places on the internet where you can find I Read Comic Books. You can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/IRCB podcast to get access to the IRCB Movie Club, Saga of Saga, Mike and Paul read Doom Patrol, Better Batmobile, hundreds of podcasts only on Patreon. Or you can follow along for free and get access to that stuff there as well. Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all of our music. We can't thank them enough. Xander is the kind of person who walks through the flames and does not feel it. I want to say thank you to Alex for being on the show with me. And if you got this far in the episode, thank you so much. You're a fantastic human being. Until next time, comics are good, and so are you.